Welcome to this brief presentation on understanding and using diversity data. We will be using the data and guidance that is provided by the Office of the Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion. At our university, we recognize 5 equity-deserving groups. These include Aboriginal peoples, racialized people, persons with disabilities, and those who identify as women and/or 2S/LGBTQ+. The equity groups mentioned here are recognized as such because of the historic and persistent barriers they have faced in their participation in post-secondary institutions as students, staff, and/or faculty. When embarking on a search, hiring committees should therefore review the available data on representation in order to determine which equity groups they should prioritize. For each equity group, data is available on community representation and university-wide representation. Department-specific and student data can also be accessed. Once this information is used to determine which equity group ought to be prioritized, hiring committees will engage in appropriate outreach activities to attract and recruit accordingly. The faculty recruitment portal also consists of the applicant diversity self-ID. All applicants are asked to complete the diversity self-ID and have the option of selecting prefer not to answer for any of the questions. The data is presented in a downloadable report as well as pie charts. In addition to how the applicant has self-identified relative to the 5 equity groups, data is also presented on vacancy source so that the hiring committees can identify which advertising outlets have been most effective in attracting diverse candidates. Furthermore, the report allows sorting based on intersectionalities. Once the equity advocate on a committee has been selected or elected, the Office of the Vice-Provost Faculty Affairs should be notified so that access to the applicant diversity self-ID data can be provided to them. Further guidance on sharing the data within the committee is provided in a future slide in this presentation. It's important and helpful to look at equity data from multiple sources. What we have here is representation within the university based on the diversity self-IDs completed by existing faculty members. Data on representation within the different academic programs is also available, but sometimes it might be the case that representation within a program is low and therefore it's not a good measure of where your department or school should be in terms of representation from a particular equity group. So this is a good reference point in that regard. The data that's provided here is in relation to our overall representation. So while you might see a percentage that seems fairly close to community representation, for example, women, the reality is that there is quite a bit of variance within the university across different faculties and departments, which is why department-specific data is also important to look at. It's important to emphasize that while the numbers are important, our equity goals should not be only about the numbers. Diverse faculty with diverse perspectives, experiences, and thought are fundamental to innovation, teaching, and scholarship at TMU. The representation of underrepresented groups is used as a way to measure our progress in expanding and diversifying thought and knowledge at the university. The data only has meaning if used to further that objective rather than focusing only on identity. Your department data might look something like this. In a small department, in order to protect confidentiality, the actual numbers may not be provided, but color coding and symbols are used so that you're able to develop a sense of where you are relative to representation within the faculty and the community. The table shows if the department or school is above or below the faculty or community representation, or if there are no full-time faculty members that identify in an equity group. As mentioned earlier, it's important to always compare yourselves against community representation so that you have a more accurate picture of what your representative should look like. If you only look at your faculty representation or even student representation, both of which could be on the low end, then you could be misguided about what your priorities should be. Even when you compare yourselves against community representation, we want to caution you about how you read your data. For instance, our earlier slide showed that there were 8% Black people in the GTA. If we have a small department of, say, 10 faculty and one of them is Black, that is 10%. This looks favorable, but we also need to be mindful of the other issues associated with being the lone member of an equity group, and for that reason, it might still make sense to attract and recruit more Black-identified individuals. Search committees are also encouraged to consider intersectionality. For example, a department or school may have a high representation of women, but not racialized or Black women. Similarly, there may be a good representation of 2S LGBTQ+ full-time faculty, but little or no representation of trans people. Student diversity data visualizations for undergraduate and graduate programs are available on the Diversity Self-ID website. You can download the data for each equity group and have that to refer to for your discussions. For each visualization, users may select the faculty and the equity group from drop-down menus. All of the programs and the faculty appear in a bar graph, with bars depicting the representation of the selected equity group in that program, ordered from the highest representation to the lowest representation. There is a line going through the bar graph showing the faculty representation. This allows users to compare the program representation with the faculty representation. Another line running through the bar graph shows the community representation. The data from the graphs can be downloaded into MS, Excel, or Google Sheets. On this slide, a sample data is provided for women faculty and women students. Using the data on this slide, let's assume the department or school representation of women full-time faculty is 35%. That is lower than both the TMU undergraduate student representation as well as the undergraduate student representation in the faculty. And let's assume that Program B is taught by the full-time faculty in the department or school. This would mean that the full-time faculty in the department or school do not reflect the students they teach in terms of women students. Depending on the full-time faculty representation from the other equity groups, the hiring committee may want to prioritize hiring women. Of course, when prioritizing any equity group, the hiring committee will continue to consider the short and long-term goals of the department, including curriculum or program development, SRC priorities, and so on.